Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in. In this video, we're going to take a look at a PlayStation 2 mod I've been thinking about for a long time, and that you probably shouldn't do, and I'll explain why in just a second. As you probably already know, one of the most popular ways to play games on a soft-modded PlayStation 2 is through the Open PlayStation 2 Loader, or OPL for short. And traditionally, the best way to do that on a FAT PlayStation 2 is to store the games on an internal hard drive connected with a dedicated adapter. Here I've got both the original Sony IDE adapter as well as a knockoff SATA version which does not include a functional network connector, but at least allows me to use a modern SSD. However, the issue with this method is that loading games on the internal hard drive often means taking the whole thing apart and plug the disk into a USB adapter in order to load new games from a PC. So long story short, I'd like to be able to use the hard drive adapter, but I'd like to replace the regular hard drive with an SD card, which should be easily accessible somewhere on the front of the console. But before we dive into this, let's come back to why you probably shouldn't do this. At the time of filming, there's a much more convenient solution called MC2SIO, which allows you to load games from SD card through the memory card slot and is compatible with both FAT and slim versions of the PS2. This method is about as fast as the internal hard drive solution, which means short loading times and smooth FMV playback, all without needing to modify the console. However, as we'll see later, I believe that the mod I have in mind still has a couple of crucial advantages over the MC2SIO, which means it could still be relevant for those of you who have a FAT PlayStation 2. But now let's get to work. I decided to use the original Sony IDE adapter I have, but the procedure should be almost identical for the SATA version. For the IDE version, we're going to need an IDE to SD card adapter, a male to female IDE extension cable, and an IDE to floppy drive power extension cable. All these components can be picked up for a few dollars both on Amazon and AliExpress. All we need to do now is remove the bottom plastic panel, as well as the motherboard shielding and the bottom of the drive bay. Next step is removing the steel grid from the front of the drive bay, which can be easily broken off with pliers. After having marked the rough position of the SD card adapter, I placed it on 10mm standoffs, aligned it with the marks, and then proceeded to carefully cut a slot in the front ventilation panel. Then I glued the standoffs to the bottom of the drive bay and connected the IDE cables. And that's where I faced my first serious challenge. The IDE connector sat too high above the board, which ended up not fitting properly in the drive bay. Luckily, this could be solved by snapping off the connector's fastener, which is not really necessary anyway. I also added some very thin washers to the front standoffs to give the adapter the slightest angle and align it properly with the slot I cut in the ventilation panel. Finally, I reassembled everything, connected the IDE cables, and installed the hard drive adapter. Just like with a regular hard drive, the first thing to do is use the FreeMacBoot HDD formatter to properly format our SD card. Now we can simply transfer the SD card to the PC and use HDL dump to load games onto the card. As we can see, games launch just fine through OBL and FMV cutscenes are perfectly smooth. Now back to why you might still choose to perform this mod as opposed to using an MC2 SIO. First of all, you get to keep your memory card slot, so you can have a FreeMac boot on a dedicated memory card in slot 2 and use slot 1 to save your games on a regular memory card. Second is compatibility. The MC2 SIO seems to be relatively picky about the SD card brand and the version of OPL used. On the other hand, using several different SD cards with my mod has given me no problem whatsoever, even on older versions of OPL, and so far has been more stable even than the knockoff SATA adapter with an SSD, though I should stress that things are likely to keep improving on the MC2 SIO front, and it won't take long before most current compatibility issues are fixed. In conclusion, I'm really happy with how this turned out, but as I mentioned earlier, I think the MC2 SIO would still be the better overall solution for most people. Anyway, thanks again for watching and see you all next time.